All right, good morning. My name is Jeff Orrock here at the National Weather Service office in Wakefield. Going to run through the briefing for this week. It's going to take us from today all the way through, I'd say, most of the weekend. We'll kind of talk about what's going on. Not a lot of changes here. Tropical Storm Dexter is out there. I'm in the Atlantic, so we'll spend some time talking about that. But really, there's some more interest out there in the further in the South Atlantic that we'll be watching here, probably really over the next, I'd say, 10 days or 2 weeks. So that's kind of looking long range. As far as the biggest threat we have going on right now is really the rip currents. We had pretty roughed up surf conditions all weekend long with a strong northeast to east wind that was gusty really all weekend long. It built the waves up. Had some pretty dangerous surf conditions out there. That does continue today with those continued onshore winds. Tomorrow we'll see that the northern beaches might get down to about a moderate threat with those waves getting to maybe 3 feet versus 4 feet up here around Ocean City, but it's still going to be fairly kicked up. It's not going to be a calm day by any means. It's just we might lose that high threat up here, but down in Virginia Beach with the wind direction and waves staying about 3 to 4 feet, probably going to have to stay in a high risk, probably for the next couple of days. Looking at some of the rip current models, I'll throw it up here for Ocean City. The predictor says, it's going to stay high, here for a while. And you do notice that the rip current threat, the probability of rips increases once you get into a little bit later this week on the 7th and the 8th. But if you notice the wave height, it is a little bit below 4 feet, maybe trying to get down to around 3 feet. So you're kind of in that area where it's borderline moderate, maybe borderline high risk. It's still pretty rough out there with those waves coming on the beach. But you do notice that rip probability does really increase as you get into Thursday and Friday later on in the week. And if you just jump a little bit further south, we'll look at the model here for Virginia Beach. Notice that Virginia Beach threat is quite a bit higher than what you saw there at Ocean City. It does kind of show a little bit of a dip, even though it's still keeping it high risk. It does show a little bit of dip here as we get into, let's say, about maybe late Tuesday, Wednesday. But if you notice that rip risk really kind of bounces back up, stays really well above high going into the later part of this week and probably a little bit into the weekend. And if you look at the wave height, it's because the wave heights are hanging around more around 4 feet. Eventually they come down to 3. That's why you see that probability decrease a little bit there, but still remaining high. And then you see those waves build right back up as we get into a little bit later this week. So bottom line is it's going to stay churned up along the coast. We're really not looking at any calm days out there by any means. So that's probably going to be the main story, especially for our folks with tourism and coastal interests there, with the beaches just being kicked up really all week long. So, what's really going on weather pattern wise? We'll kind of throw on the satellite here so you can kind of see the bigger picture of what's happening out there. So, for us, we're basically the sun's been breaking out everywhere. We had some clouds over Southeast Virginia. They're trying to redevelop a little bit, but high pressure to the north is really kind of basically dominating our weather, and it's pushed this cold front way to our south. That's why you're seeing all those clouds, down across the Carolinas. Dexter actually formed along the front. So initially it was a cluster of thunderstorms along that frontal boundary near the Gulf Stream. It eventually organized into a cluster of showers and storms, and it's actually moved off the front now a little bit. So it is its own entity. You see the front's a little bit further to the north of it. So it is its own entity now, and it is being tracked by the National Hurricane Center. But you can see it's definitely moving away, basically going to continue to move away from the coast. And so this front being parked out here over the Gulf Stream, that's what they do a probability of development. We'll talk about that. You can already see the cluster of showers and storms down here. So we'll see what happens maybe as the week progresses if another low forms along this front. And this is pretty typical of a July type of a pattern where you get these fronts that do stall out over the Gulf Stream, and you can get these waves to develop along the Gulf Stream. So we'll see what happens. Turning our attention more towards Africa, you don't see a whole lot going on right now. You do actually see some dust. You see some of this tan here off the coast. There's some drier air, some dust in the air. But there is a wave maybe starting to kind of come into the image here on the very end there on the far right. And so we'll see what happens with that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here and see what happens as this maybe gets out into the Atlantic a little bit later in the next, I'd say, 10 days or so. But pretty nice for us right now. Again, the overall weather pattern for today, high pressure to the north, stall front to our south. But then you notice by the time we get into, I'd say, really about Wednesday and especially Thursday, we may have another little area of low pressure kind of trying to form along that front, that cluster of storms. may start to develop at central circulation. And so a little bit of a wave might develop here off the Carolinas. It might kind of intensify a little bit. I mean, not a lot, but it may be just enough to kind of really kind of keep that good onshore flow. Because what happens for us is we keep the high pressure to the north, which is a pretty strong high, 1032 high to the north, but then you have low pressure system develop to the south. And so, by the time you get into Thursday, Friday, we're in this squeeze play with decent high pressure here, off of New England, and maybe a low pressure system forming off the Carolinas. We get stuck in the middle, and this pressure gradient tightens, and we get this consistent, easterly flow, northeasterly flow coming way off the Atlantic. And so that keeps things, kicked up. It does keep temperatures cooler. We'll stay probably slightly below normal for the most part, but it could actually keep things bumped up later this week as far as the marine side goes. And may also see an increased chance of showers across the area too, with that increasing, easterly flow, bringing in more moisture, getting kind of caught between these two systems. Rain chances could increase as well. Next 3 days, in fact, I'd say really going out the rest of this week, we're not expecting any severe weather, even though chances of showers, maybe a thunderstorm probabilities increase later in the week. There's no risk of severe weather. There's no dynamics to drive anything. Tuesday through Thursday, and this is mainly geared, I'd say, more for Thursday. May see a little bit of shower activity, see some very, very low amounts of precipitation across the region, not a lot at all. You definitely see more down here to the south and to the southwest with the front and some other activity going on, but for us, not seeing a whole lot. But when you get to Friday through Monday, this is where we're starting to see more of that low pressure system forming along the Carolinas, starting to influence our weather. And so, I'd say from Friday through the weekend, with that continued onshore flow, I think we're going to see some decent showers, maybe especially along the Carolinas. Some of that might bleed into northeast North Carolina. There's going to be probably a sharp cutoff in how far north any kind of showers make it over the weekend, because that high pressure to the north is kind of dry. And so it's going to push that moisture. The low is going to push the moisture north, but it's eventually going to hit some dry air. So it might be able to sneak into Hampton Roads. That's why you see maybe half an inch here making up through Hampton Roads. But the amounts of precipitation decrease as you go further north. So we'll see. The cutoff may be a little bit sharper than this, but you definitely get the flavor here that with that little weight, that low pressure developing off the Carolinas, definitely going to see an increasing chance of showers. I'd say, southeast Virginia and going down, off the North Carolina, South Carolina coast here as that thing just sits here and spins and maybe get a few showers associated with it. This is just a breakdown of your chance of rain, different locations here, about every 6 hours. So you can see we're pretty good even through Wednesday. Wednesday's got some pretty low chances of just an isolated shower. But the chance of showers does increase a little bit here for Thursday as that wave of low pressure starts to form. And it's really persistent, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We're not looking at washouts, I don't think, right now. We'll see if that changes. But right now we do have some chances of showers really every single day from Thursday on. And again, this is kind of looking at the temperatures as well as chance of precipitation, but no 90s on that map at all. You look at the chart right there. I mean, you're not even seeing any 90-degree readings. So things warm up a little bit. I mean, I'd say slightly as we get into Wednesday, but then things cool off a little bit again for Thursday, Friday with that increasing flow coming off the ocean. We'll see what happens on Sunday. Those temperatures could be a little bit warm, but the bottom line here is the heat's gone, and we're going to stay with temperatures, I'd say slightly below normal, really for most of this week. So that does take us into the tropics here, and things to kind of keep an outlook for. So this is Dexter moving offshore, not going to be an issue. This is that area the Hurricane Center is kind of watching for maybe a 10% probability of development. Again, that's that stalled front that's still sitting out there. It might develop another area low pressure, could kick some moisture our way. This should not be a significant threat. And then we're going to have to kind of watch what's going on out here in the Atlantic. We are moving into that time of year. The weather pattern may be shifting into a different phase where the Atlantic may start to become more active, the way things are starting to cycle across the northern hemisphere. So that wave that's way over Africa right now, by the time it gets here in the south central Atlantic, it does look like it's going to try to form into a tropical system. Be careful with this because, there are already folks, trying to show single model runs of this thing plowing into the Carolinas. So, that kind of fun has begun. It's too far out to know where this thing's going to go and how fast it's going to develop. So just be careful with that. Just know that, I'd say in the next 7 to 8 days or so, we're probably going to see some development out here in this area. and it is going to generally track towards the west and west northwest, and then we'll see how long it lasts and how far west this system can track. So a lot to be determined here. If this was to be a player in our weather in the mid-Atlantic, I mean, we're looking at 2 weekends from now or even later. So it's a long ways off, and it's a lot to watch. So just be careful with that. You're going to see model runs all over the place, and it's going to be take your pick, of the day, as far as what folks want to talk about. So just watch it, be aware of it. We'll see what's going on maybe early next week with this system, and if it's forming, and if it is, maybe what the model trends are at that point. So, to stay tuned. Looking at way out beyond that, we'll see if this really plays out. Looking 10 to 14 days out, it looks like we could be getting back into above normal temperatures. We'll see. There's some confidence that things may start to go back to normal, start to warm up here a little bit as we get 2 weeks out. But we'll see how that goes. And precipitation probabilities are almost normal to maybe just a low probability that we may be above normal. But we'll see what this trend is. We'll see what kind of confidence we have as this goes on. But temperatures should start to warm up a little bit as we get about 2 weeks from now. Now, one of the things we've been dealing with this persistent easterly flow is some elevated tides. We did have some minor tidal flooding across Hampton Roads and the James River, especially up in the northern bay, Lewisetta, Bishop's Head, up towards Cambridge. We had some tidal levels that got up to minor flooding, about maybe a foot of inundation in some areas. We're not seeing water levels that high at this point. We're seeing some better ebb tides where the water's been getting out of the bay. The winds aren't as strong right now. So we're still seeing elevated tides everywhere. And in fact, if you go day by day by day, you can kind of see the areas that we're seeing the elevated tides. So, for today and tomorrow, it's mainly here on the upper bay, Tappahannock River, Potomac River, where we're seeing some of the elevated tides. By the time you get into Wednesday, those winds may start to increase a little bit, and you may start to see a little bit more elevated tides, even getting up towards Bishop's Head and Cambridge, starting to get a little bit more of the high tides. And then by the time you get into Thursday, and this is going to continue into Friday as those east winds start to pick up, with that low pressure forming to the south and the high to the north, may start to see tides, starting to get, I'd say nuisance to maybe even near minor by the time we get into Friday and Saturday, and getting into later into the weekend. So tides are just going to be running elevated, no significant impacts here. It's just this prolonged east wind is going to keep the tides up. And even though the tides are kind of starting to return to normal in most areas, those tides may come back up to nuisance flood levels, at least by the end of the week, and maybe even starting to flirt with minor again. We'll see by the time we get into the weekend. So getting on the marine side of things, really, for today, we got some lingering wind here with the area in yellow talking about maybe some gusts to 20 knots. Waves are still about 4 feet, 5 feet just offshore. Things do improve for Tuesday here a little bit. You see kind of a little less of the yellow, less of the orange. But notice here Wednesday, as you get into Thursday and Friday, you see a lot more orange on the map. So getting more of those wind gusts to 25 knots. And again, that's what that area of low pressure forming to our south and the high pressure to the north. We just get that squeeze play. So some of the peak winds we might see between now and Thursday evening, those winds are going to pick back up as we get through Thursday. So you see the peak gusts here maybe getting back up to 25 to 28 knots. And if you look here on the hourly chart, the winds do pick up some Wednesday, but then on Thursday, they pick up even more. And again, that wind direction's out of the east-northeast there. So pretty good rough wind conditions for us for the ocean and the bay, as well as the rivers. That's a rough direction. So again, now comparing the sustained winds versus the wind gusts, really today and into tomorrow, even though we keep the east wind, the northeast wind, it's a little bit lighter. For today and tomorrow, it starts to increase a little bit tomorrow afternoon, increases even more for Thursday, and then those winds are going to persist into Friday. And I got to be honest with you, I think these Friday winds are probably going to persist even into Saturday with this just continued northeast winds, probably small craft advisories in effect, probably from, I'd say, starting maybe as early as Wednesday evening, or at least by Thursday. And they could actually last all the way through the weekend. We could be getting into a period there with some small craft advisories and rough conditions. Seas along the coast still averaging around 5 to 6 feet right now, so it's a long fetch. So we've been keeping things kind of bumped up here on the ocean. The bay and the rivers have come down to about 1 to 2 feet, but this 4 feet you see here, 3 to 4 feet, is really geared towards Thursday. When those winds start to increase Thursday, as the winds pick up out of the northeast, those waves are going to kick right back up here on the bay to 3 to 4 feet. And I think that's going to be more like Wednesday night into Thursday and Friday. You're going to see those 3 to 4 foot waves here across the bay. And of course, that may persist all through next weekend. So that's all we had for today. This Monday, we'll have another live briefing on Thursday.